Hi, everyone. Welcome to our roundtable today. Thanks for joining me. I would love it if all of you could just go around and give a little brief introduction of yourself, what your role is, and then we'll move into the conversation and I'll go over sort of what we're going to talk about and we'll go from there. We start with you, Gail?
Sure. My name is Gail Jacobs. I've been in HR for about 25 years at this point, which is crazy to even think about. I've run HR teams in China and Asia. I've also done talent acquisition and ops. I consider my strength on the data and analytics side. And right now I'm not working and taking a much needed break, but I have been in industries like such as most recently biotech, high tech, construction, and consulting, and along with engineering and manufacturing. So I have a wide breadth of knowledge on that. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Guinevere Curry, and I am the VP of Global People Operations for Lilt. I also am the founder and CEO of Guide to HR, which is a consulting fractional business in the HR space, focused mostly on tech, startups, small size businesses. Been doing it for, Gail, I can't believe it either, 20 years at this point in time. Where does the time go? And really, I'm a unique HR bird. My background is actuarial mathematics, so I love numbers and surveys and data. So I'm ready to get my data geek in the conversation and get going.
Oh, well, I wish I had a background in actuarial mathematics. I'm not that impressive, but my name is Shay Samyatin. Very happy to be here. I've spent more than a decade scaling up talent and people functions for venture and private equity-backed companies. Have an exit under my belt. Have usually taken companies from about 50, 60 people up to about the 600 mark. So generally speaking, I'm great at the build and coming in with foundational processes, which is why I'm here and why we're talking about data, because I think like diversity and inclusion, the earlier you can start working with data and establishing those best practices from the outset, the better the people function is, the better your talent function is, the better the organization is, the more successful it is. So I'm really passionate about those areas. And then on top of that, I would say I've recently pivoted into an exec recruiting firm, and I'm doing exec recruiting with this firm, Sapphire Partners in particular, because they are the only firm I've worked with that's actually data. I think in general, data and being data-driven is sort of the future of work in our space. And so thinking about how we can be smarter in all facets is just the best way to go.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue because that's obviously what we're here to talk about. So I'm Kim, I'm with Presidio, and obviously we're an analytics platform, but we're not going to talk about that today. What we want to talk about is we noticed through conversations that we were getting some feedback where some HR leaders were struggling with getting the right metrics and pulling insights from the metrics they were getting. So we thought, oh, this is interesting. We're seeing some of the same pain points come up. So we did a survey. We focused specifically on talent acquisition metrics for the first survey. And what sort of was a glaring thing that came out of that survey, which is sort of prompting the evolution into this conversation, was that everyone was tracking and monitoring and reporting, but their confidence level on the data they were presenting was very low, specifically with CHROs. So some of the sort of other roles within HR felt comfortable with the data, but when it came to the CHRO, who's the one that is oftentimes presenting it at the table, their confidence levels were quite low. And so when we saw that, we were like, oh, that's interesting. We need to find out why. And so then we ran a much larger survey to sort of delve into the reasoning behind that. But so why I wanted to have this conversation with a couple of leaders in the space and ones that are really familiar with data and have used it a lot in the past is to try to get some more information and then help others out there. If they are some of those ones that mark their confidence levels as quite low, what can we do to improve that and bring them up to speed? So I'm going to put a couple topics out there and I would love for you all to speak and add your opinion. And again, think of this as however, whoever's viewing this, how can we help them? Or if they're struggling with some of these things, what can we give back to hopefully get people sort of on the right track? So based on what I just mentioned, that the confidence levels were low and we didn't at first know what contributed to that. So I'd love to hear some insights. One, if you've experienced that in your own roles or own departments, and then two, what was causing that and sort of driving that insecurity, and then we'll lead into how do we sort of fix that issue, or how can we at least help with that. Then Gail, if you want to start, and we'll just go around the group.
Yeah, I've certainly had this exact issue with my CHRO, no doubt about it. I was most recently running a talent acquisition team, and there were always questions about what counts as a rec, for instance, just on time to fill or time to start. We have evergreen recs that are constantly open. So are we counting those? We have recs that we might fill in a day. Should those be counted? So there's questions about just what we should count, even if the data is okay. The other side of it is there's questions around the organization about sometimes just the definition of some of the analytics. So the CHRO and I might have a what we consider a standard definition, but we did notice on some metrics, for instance, we were disagreeing with the finance team. So our data will come back different. So, and one of the other big issues was, when do you finish, or what is your end date? So finance will count the end of the day of the last day of the month, and we might start our count on the first day of the month. So that was throwing some things off as well. So it wasn't necessarily that our data was inaccurate. It was the perception of inaccuracy rather than the actual data being inaccurate. There are mistakes in data. No, there's not a company out there that doesn't have a mistake in their data. However, for 95% of it, we were feeling pretty confident on it, but we certainly did get some issues being raised and questions about it too.
Yeah, so it was more around the lines of the metric definitions weren't clear. So reports were being done, but everyone had a different idea of what that entailed. Okay.
That was part of it. Yes. Yep. And when you're doing this all manually, which most of the HR teams are, it can be very difficult because you're in the midst of spreadsheets and trying to consolidate a bunch of reports. Mistakes are going to happen in there too. So technology is, it could be a huge help for most organizations for that matter.
Great, even adding the technology in, I mean, I use a really great platform, ATS platform I love, but I think it just goes back to what does time to fill mean? And I actually run 2 reports, time to fill in regards to like the position being open from the manager perspective. So how long does it take from their perspective until the person is actually working, which really ultimately I have found in my experience, that's what the business cares about. But then as you start to want to dive into why is that so long, then as the HR leader, you care about, well, what is my team doing that is taking so long? So let's dive into the time to close that rec, right? Which is really like, especially if you have international, sometimes that time to fill, there's a 3-month automatic add-on because notice periods in EMEA are 3 months. So like, you know, I'm not going to punish my recruiting team because of a 3-month notice period that no one can control. But from a manager's perspective, it took 6 months or 2 months to fill, or like whatever, right, to fill the role. So it's like, what question are you asking? That's like the first thing. What are you trying to identify to then be able to say, okay, this is the right metric, or this is the metric we should be looking at. And then like anything else, bad data in, bad data out, right? So, you know, making sure that everyone is on the same page on how you're going to maintain your data, whether it's manually in a spreadsheet or in a platform, and then understanding if you're in a platform, understanding how it's calculating things, because a lot of these platforms now have dashboards, and I'll go into it, I'm like, that does not make sense. I expected there to be X and there's a B in there. And I'm like, what? And then you dive in and you're like, okay, this is not right. And then you have to figure out, is it because my understanding of what they're reporting is not what they're calculating? Again, going back to that methodology perspective. So, you know, validating is like key before you communicate out anything. Validate that, like sanitize, you know, test it and see, does this make sense? Like I always do, because I'm a math girl. I always go, okay, here's what I think the answer should be before I even get to it. And if it's anywhere close, okay, that felt like, okay, that feels good. But if it's off, I'm like, okay, why? And then dive into it.
Yeah, great. Excellent. Thank you, Shayna.
In my experience, having worked with many CPOs, CHROs, and heads of talent in various ways and CEOs, I think the anxiety from CHROs is trifold. I think one piece we have to just acknowledge is reporting structure. You know, for a head of talent, it's a little easier to be less stressed about your data because probably you're most accountable to your CHRO, but your CHRO is going to be accountable to the entire executive team, maybe your investors, maybe your board. So I think that sense of pressure is valid. That's the first piece I would say is I think there's always this, you know, if there's a CTO, it might be different, but typically there tends to be that layer difference where you have a little more opportunity to catch an error in your TA data because it's being filtered. But the CHRO has the pressure of saying, I'm supposed to capture all of these people facets at the same time, be able to speak to any one of them instantaneously. And even if something changed between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, I'm supposed to be able at 2 o'clock to know exactly what's going on. And it is very hard to make data move at the speed of people. I actually think people move in many ways faster, right? Things change all the time in the people function. You could hire someone between 1:30 and 2:30 and suddenly the CHRO's data is inaccurate. So I think along with sort of reporting structure, there's this element of how do you help data move at the speed of people or vice versa? How do you create transparency for the head of people so that from 1:30 to 2:30, they really can get the most accurate look at their holistic map of what's happening in the organization. And so I found great help with tooling so far in various ways, but I have to piece it together, right? It's Greenhouse fused with Talent Wall, fused with Excel spreadsheets, fused with finance. And it's been very clunky. You know, maybe you have Bamboo or some other kind of HRIS Workday plugged into that. And so really it's been a challenge, I think, over time to try to get those systems to work, but I've tried to create tooling to sit on top so you can get real-time insights. So I think that's a cause of anxiety. And then I think the other cause of anxiety that isn't the case for everyone, but I've seen it with many CHROs is we inherently came up into this function, even if we're good at math and good at data, we came up into this function because we love people. And so our perspective on how we think about data is just inherently different. Like we can look at the spreadsheet and many CHROs can get in and do VBA and do VLOOKUPs and do really nice Excel magic. But I think there's always this sense of double checking oneself to say, am I really thinking about this from the same lens as the other stakeholders in the business who are deep in data all the time? And so it is just inherently incredibly challenging to marry a data lens with a people lens because people are so messy in every way. And so, you know, again, we found some tools to help alleviate that anxiety for CHROs, but I think the biggest solve that's needed is the sense of how can we from 1:30 to 2:30 help that CHRO know exactly what has changed and still give them insights and confidence across all of their systems as to why that number has shifted in a particular way.
Yeah, it's all good insights, and it just leads to data is great as well, but if you're not able to make or look at it and have insights from it through the people lens, understand like what does this data mean, then we're just reporting. But I love like you know, you're looking at it in two ways of this is numbers, but then it's also there's humans attached to it that are impacted by this. So appreciate all your input. So on that note, it's kind of great because it sort of aligns with what we found in our survey. We'd asked HR leaders what would improve your confidence levels, and all of you sort of touched on some of those components. We asked, you know, would unified data make a difference? Would it be, do you just need additional resources like training, more internal people to help you, an analyst? Do you need better technology? And what we found, the results in our survey, and obviously this is a subset, that doesn't mean everyone, but we found is that leaders that had been in the HR field for over 10 years, so more seasoned leaders, they more heavily responded. They preferred better technology or more technology to sort of round that out, get that data that they need to help them feel more confident. And then people that had been in the roles 3 or less years said that they needed more resources. And, you know, Gail, you asked a good question before the call about if that was tied to the size of the team. And we didn't see a true correlation of like really small teams consistently said more resources. It was kind of all over the place where there was a pretty good split between more resources and better technology sort of across most of the responses. So I would love to hear your thoughts. And you don't have to stay within those, those two components, but as leaders yourself, whenever you have any unique perspective, because you just said you're a math girl, so you might say, I'm happy with Excel, I'll work it all day long. But I would love to hear all your thoughts on if there is something in your role that would have sort of helped build your confidence, whether it's within those categories or outside of them.
Well, I'm always looking for ways to have systems and tools make my life easier, make my team lives easier. I've also always been in a very pretty much small subset of companies, so having additional resources is never really an option. So I've, currently at Lilt, one of our virtues is find a way or make one. And so that is what we live. And that's actually what I've lived throughout my whole entire career is I can't go out and buy a Maserati, nor would I need to just to go to the grocery store, right? A Ford or a Chevy or whatever would do just fine. So, finding those resources and making them work for you. But yeah, I think the biggest thing that I'm looking towards in future is we have all of these data sets, and some companies are an all-in-one platform, but even if they're an all-in-one platform, they still have other data sets. They have those Excels, they have the financial reports, they might have like email or Slack or other things. So as an HR leader, I have access to a plethora of data. The problem is that I have no way to actually view all that data under one lens, under one household, to manipulate it in one place. And so having that capability would just be a game changer from my perspective, because then I can actually see the life cycle of someone from the moment they applied through their whole recruiting cycle to getting the offer, to getting onboarded, to the promotions and the performance management and the comp changes and all of that to the end of their life cycle, and be able to see that and then go back and be like, okay, how do I repeat and get 20 more of those amazing people that were able to come in, get onboarded super quickly, or be promoted and be a key performer at that business. So having ways to look at the data in a bigger, more strategic perspective is what I look towards the future and hope to get to sooner rather than later. Anyone?
I can go off on that one because I completely agree with it. And if you're I've had small teams with only 2 or 3 people, and I've been at an 80,000 person company. So I've seen the gamut of that. And what's interesting about it is that if you're with a small team, and as Guinevere was saying, you have 6 different platforms, you're obviously, and you can't even get your head wrapped around, how do I consolidate this? So your automatic response is, I need another person who can grab that spreadsheet and then, be that spreadsheet jockey. That would be a big help, because most tools that are out there, there aren't a lot of tools out there that really can consolidate all that data at a reasonable cost. So there's some BI warehouses and things like that, but it's an astronomical stand-up cost, and to keep that going, that a small company isn't going to be able to handle. So until that gets to be sort of pushed out into the organization, I think if you're leading a small team, maybe with a small company, you're almost always going to ask for that additional headcount rather than the technology. And most HR people are not that analytical and not that business savvy. So it's the business that's telling them, we would like this type of data in many cases. So they're just trying to figure out how to survive on a day-to-day basis. And it's much easier to get a person in there than it is to stand up a platform, even though you would be saying longer term, in 6 months or a year or in 6 years, it's better to have that platform. Your need is so immediate. So I completely get that. But I do think that the technology, and I was just at a conference last week, I think the technology is changing. So more and more HR teams could have access to a data warehouse, so to speak, if you will. That's not the right word to use for it, but in some way to consolidate all those pieces and parts and everything like that. And most companies also can't afford something like a Workday where it's just one platform, and it's going to be a whole bunch of different platforms for a long time to come.
Yeah, and just to tack onto your point, I've experienced this too, just in my marketing roles, that sometimes adding on new technology can be more of a burden than not having the technology if it requires like a, insane implementation, integrations, ramp up time. And then the person that has to do their day job is then forced to learn a new technology, which then just feels like overwhelming. So that very much makes sense, that perspective for smaller teams to just say like, I can't deal with new technology. I want to just get me someone to help. Makes sense. What about you, Shayna? What's your thoughts?
Big plus one to Gail and Guinevere's thoughts. I think small teams absolutely are going to play the game of trying to grow themselves. There's more to gain from adding a team member at that size. I think the order of magnitude could be bigger because likely if you have a small team, the insights you're being asked to pull may not be as complex, frankly, right? You're probably establishing key foundational practices around how do we measure time to fill? How do we define time to fill? Do we even have a headcount plan? Do we even know what we're hiring next quarter? There's some really big sort of like tactical items in those phases that you tend to want to get through. How is onboarding going? Do we have formal offer letters? Once these pieces are in place, I would push small organizations though to think bigger. So I think there's opportunity there. Like if that's what the data is implying, I think there's genuine opportunity for teams of 3, 4, 5, 10 people to think more strategically now about incorporating data earlier for 2 reasons. One is because that's where the nature of our entire industry is going. Gen AI isn't going anywhere. We don't know how it's going to change our industry, but we know it will. And so the question is, are you going to be at the forefront of that movement of change and trying new technologies? Or are you going to be left behind? Those are the 2 paths for it. There is no other path. So I think that's part of it. It's like embracing change and trying things with the understanding that there may be investment at the front end with huge dividends paid later on for that initial investment of time. And then the second piece is really empowering your teams as a leader around embracing technology as well. So I really love what Guinevere said a little while ago around bad data in, bad data out. I haven't experienced anything more true. And I think it takes us back to that anxiety of the CHRO. If you have a 20-person team and every 2 people are in a different system, it only takes one person improperly using that system or forgetting to enter a data point to ruin the data that you then send in a report to the CEO 5 minutes later. It really does. And so I think the other piece that people should still think about is not am I resourcing with a human, but am I looking at the people on my team and the skills and capabilities? And am I making sure that I'm setting as a leader clear practices in each of these data sets around what we're doing and when, so that the rest of the team can actually be trusted to create good data sets to pull from. So I think it's very cyclical, right? But if you both embrace the technology and then devote time to training your team, I think that frees you up for it to not be a slog and you can be hitting the ground running in a month using the technology in the right way.
Yeah, and I'd like to, can I add really quickly? I love to like double down on that and say, as a leader, you're training your team, but bring them along in the journey, help them understand why it's important and how you're using it. Because if you're a really great leader, you're hiring smarter people. So if they understand what you're trying to accomplish and where you're going and what the business needs are, then they might actually come forward with a better solution, and also hold themselves higher accountable in regards to understanding this is a decision that's going to impact XYZ for the business. And, then I know I definitely need to double check my work, triple check my work.
Gail, did you have?
I was just going to say, Guinevere, that part, the why is the biggest part. And especially for the junior or the new employees on your team, they don't know why we're pulling this data or why it's so important to data and for data entry. So that if you can't express that, then you're going to have a huge problem down the road. And I've personally experienced that as far as some critical data not being entered correctly. And it created it ended up ultimately to be a compliance problem. So, and they had no idea that EEOC comes in or these groups. So it was a big deal.
Yeah, that's interesting. One of the, just a completely side note, but we asked what the main drivers were for reporting initiatives, and the number one answer was compliance and governance. So if that's not working out, it's going to be a problem. You all sort of touched on this a little bit, but I'm going to ask it because I think it's an important question, and this can be a little bit more of a emotional response. How, you all have a lot of leadership experience, but for these people in the roles that are saying, all I need is new resources, or that maybe aren't quite yet ready to embrace that next level of technology. And Shana, we have heard so many times exactly what you said about, like, we're falling behind. I need AI, but it's too much. It's too expensive. It's too hard to implement. So there is that component. But as a leader, and you're sitting down with your team and you're trying to figure out how to, one, set them up to be successful in the role they're currently in, but even just to evolve in their career, what tips or advice do you have to work with these teams and to sort of get them to embrace the growth of their role, the growth of technology, and sort of the future of what HR is going to look like for everyone?
I can dive in on that one. It's a great question. It's very meaty. I would say that, and this is not intended to be a cop-out, it's just my sincere thought. It really goes back to actually how you hire your team. The reality, if you're coming in as a leader, is you're going to have a mix. You may be inheriting a team, but the number one thing you can control is how you hire the future folks that you bring onto the team, whether it's in the HR vertical, the TA vertical, L&D, HR ops, whatever the case may be. And so there, I think you as a leader have a responsibility to be very vigilant in your process, to not just hire directly from your network, to not just hire on your gut, but really to think about how are you incorporating vetting for that hunger, curiosity, interest in technology in your interview process. That's something very easy to suss out, right? We can think of 4 or 5 behavioral interview questions right now that ask for examples of how folks have integrated technology to make impactful bottom line business changes where they've previously been. So I think as part of it is you start with, okay, for anyone future coming onto the team, how do I think about that going forward? And then for the folks that are on the team currently, I think there are 2 answers there. The reality is that not everyone will be interested in that, and that's okay. And I think we have to embrace that, and we shouldn't penalize folks for that, right? Phases of life change, people's stress management changes, people's health changes. And so what they need and expect from their job and what they're capable of on a given year is going to be very different. And so I think it's the leader's responsibility to decide, what is the cut percentage of my team that I need to be on the sort of innovator side? What is the cut percentage I need to be on the rock star side? And what is the cut percentage of folks that I need to sort of keep the lights on my team? And having a balance of those verticals is okay. You can't have everyone on your team be super hungry, driving constantly for the next promotion, looking for the next step, or your team's going to fall apart. Like, you need people that are happy to help maintain and to adjust slightly and to support, but not be at the forefront of that change. And then the last piece I would say is, it really goes back to what the team here already said, which is around inspiration. That isn't tacky. It's not something that's overused. It's very important, I think, that a leader inspire their team toward a vision or a goal. And in HR especially, we're tired. We've had a very rough 3, 4, 5 years. We have. The HR TA, it has been a very challenging market. It has been a very hard time socially when we think about justice and equity and fairness. And so part of our responsibility as a leader right now is to create a safe space for our teams and to help inspire our teams in thinking about why being data-driven and why embracing technology is exciting for HR. And it's because it enables us to really drive bottom line impact in those areas we've struggled with in the last 4 or 5 years. How do we move more quickly so that we have more free time to devote to DEI initiatives or to devote to promotion and retention, these really inspiring programs we want to get to, but so rarely have time to get to because we get pulled back to the spreadsheet. So that's our job. I think connecting the work our teams do to the business, the success of the business, the C-suite, all of those things possible if we tell the story the right way and we think about it the right way.
Yeah. Wonderful. Anyone else want to add along to that? That was inspired.
I kind of went in a different direction of a mindset, maybe a little bit more tactical, but Kim, when you were asking that question, my first instinct was like, oh, I feel like that's exactly the conversation I have with hiring managers to get them to come along and help me hire them. I don't have time. I don't have I'm so busy. I don't have time. Well, yeah, you don't have time until you get this person in place, and then you'll be able to have time on your plate. So I feel like it's almost the same kind of thought process, right? Like you don't have time to read this article or watch this demo or go to this webinar or whatever it is to learn something new. But at the same time, that could be a trigger to actually reduce your administrative burden by 5%, which, hey, if that's like even 10 minutes, that's awesome, right?
Agreed.
So push. I think I like always think about that as like if I hear myself kind of going, well, I don't have time. Okay, hold on, wait a minute. Let me think about how I should rephrase or what am I thinking? Like, and then kind of in line with that is prioritization and maybe deprioritization. Something that we do at Lilt constantly is reevaluating what we're working on. Is that what we should be working on right now for the reason that we need to move the business forward? And maybe a lot of times the answer is like, well, yeah, but it's okay if we extend it out to make room for something that's even higher critical impact. And so, or no, let's like just table it. Maybe we'll come back to it, maybe we won't, but just kind of reevaluating what's on the work plate of everybody. Like maybe there's some things that like they're doing just because we've always done this, which I absolutely hate. That I cringe when I hear that. Like just because you always do it doesn't mean you should still be doing it or doing it that way. So maybe taking 5 minutes to just evaluate everyone's workload and are they working on the right things that are going to move the needle in the right way for the business? And if not, get it off their plate and give them space to do something that would.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in marketing, so everything you said rings so true to just my role in general. And the amount of times I've heard that we've always done it this way. I'm like, yeah, but it's been 10 years. A lot has changed. It's time to go. Yeah, that one gets me too.
I mean, how are we still on email? What didn't email get born back in like what the 70s or something? Like how is technology still on email? That's so,
now we have Slack and email. So now we have two places to go to. It just got worse.
Yeah, totally.
What about you? What's your thoughts?
Well, I was going to say one of the things I'd like to add, which goes along with what's been said before, but I found meeting, for instance, the recruiters where they are. I mean, the recruiters range in age on my team from 24 to 64. So there's a technology difference, I'll say, between them. I might say to the more senior employees, some of them are the most technologically savvy because they've kept up with it through the years. And sometimes it's the junior employee that needs to get the help. But what I've gone to each of them and say, okay, what's your pain point? What's your problem? Let's think about how do we automate this thing. And let's talk about automation. There is a difference, in my opinion, between automation and AI. So we just need to, let's do the basic as far as automation is concerned. If we can get that over that hump a little bit, then let's start talking about AI. And some of them have caught on and are doing it. The candidates are applying using AI and they're doing everything with AI. So we as a team need to get there. But as Shana was saying, there's going to be some that are going to be rock stars in that space. There's going to be some that are other, but the vast majority I have found over the years that especially recruiters, they don't have a lot of technical chops. They can get in there system wise and use it, but they can't do a V lookup on a spreadsheet or some of that stuff. So we do desperately need to bring in the technology that's easy to use because they can get there. But each of them are going to be at a different pace and a different level. And the expectation from us has to be a little bit different by person. But we still have to hire people for the business and fill it and satisfy the managers and have a good candidate experience. So yeah, they're going to be at all different levels, which is, I think, the fun part of managing a team and the most frustrating part of managing a team. So it does depend.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think I like the idea of, meeting people where they're at or asking about their pain point, because if they're saying, I need more resources, then you're like, okay, what's behind that? And then maybe we can fix that another way. That's a really great point. And so maybe when I look at survey data, it's someone saying their immediate reaction to that question is, I need better technology or I need more resources. But really, I'll have to do another survey. There's probably some underlying points that are leading to that response. So appreciate that. So I have one last question before I let you all go. And this is purely just your opinion, what your thoughts are. What does the future of HR look like to you? So we've talked about technology. Obviously, there's some things that are going to sort of stay foundational, stay the same. But we are seeing new technologies come about. We are hearing a lot about AI. And I think there sometimes is still a little bit of a disconnect between what that means for HR. So I would love a little sort of final response from all of you on what you see the future of HR and where we're headed.
I think an HR leader that's not technology savvy is not going to be able to make it. They don't have to be the people that can integrate and stand up a product, but they have to be able to understand it and use it. I also believe that the future of HR is going to be on predictive analytics and using AI to either consolidate all that information from the different platforms and making that predictive, I'll say crystal ball decision or whatever that's going to be. And also the other side of it is I think we're going to get wrapped more into finance and the business as we go along. I know that certainly has evolved over the last 25 years. So we're more involved now, but there's still many, many cases, whether it's from a company or a department, that HR is not at the table, so to speak. So I think we have to do that in order to be successful and not be just order takers throughout the whole process, but technology, AI, and predictive analytics.
Excellent. I'm in the right place then, but
I would agree with all of that and add in I feel like that's arm one, and arm two is the relationship side. Like AI can never replace the relationship side. In fact, there are so many companies out there that are AI businesses. They're companies selling AI to others, and they are growing their headcount phenomenally because they are growing their sales, their go-to-market team 80% fold. Like it's like, you know, when I was looking, I was like, I expected the AI companies' headcount to shrink because they're being more effective using their own platform and using AI as well. And it's like, no, they're growing because they have to have the relationship building function to be able to survive. And I think if you take that to the human resources side, the people operations side, it's going to be the same thing. We're going to be able to have less focus on administrative burden and tasks and be able to have more interactions and engagements with the ICs, with the managers and the leaders, and with the executive team. And I think that we'll see HR have their hand in the cookie jar, all the cookie jars of the business a little bit more, and be that overarching kind of like glue, like, hey, I heard this department talking about this, but it's that department that's doing it. Do you guys know? You guys should work together, right? And I think if connecting those dots and being the bridge of over the gaps will be a critical piece of how HR is going to be a partner at the table.
Yeah, that's great. I hope so. That would be great. And Shayna?
I too am an optimist, so I will also paint an optimistic picture. I think we could play it out in either direction, but I tend to believe that HR will continue to move closer and closer to the business. It already in the last, call it 10 years, has gone through the transformation of truly becoming a business function, right? The best in class have established that we can be data-driven. We can value insights. We can connect messy people data with real-time business impact and make smarter choices. So that's already happening. I think the biggest change from my perspective is simply that from a tactical lens, the makeup of teams will look very different. Like all changes with AI, jobs will be eliminated and new jobs will be created. So I think it very likely that these specialist coordinator roles on the HR and TA and L&D side of the house are going to start to be diminished, or we'll only need one where we once needed 10. It's very likely to me that sourcers will also be eliminated longer term as a traditional function, because so much of AI should be able to tie skills and profiles to job mapping more effectively. And then new roles will be created. So more strategic roles within the function, even prompt engineers within HR. One could see a person's primary job being systems analysis and prompt engineering for HR, where they're really engaging with the AI tools across the landscape and tech stack to help the HR team move faster and more effectively. I would absolutely double down and say the rise of EQ as a valuable asset, the rise of what I think erroneously call soft skills will become more important. The ability to work with people one-to-one or one-to-many and really compel, strategize, help remove blockers for people is something that's really, really hard to automate. And it's something that will probably end up being a bigger part of the HR function. So from my lens, the future looks bright. I think the things that we have to look out for are very much around diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? These tools can also be very challenging, not tools that sit on tech stacks per se, but as we think about things like sourcing, job matching, et cetera, that can be really hairy in terms of equity and fairness. And so, it's our responsibility as a function and as people invested in this tech to use the tech to help diversify who is using the tech and to make sure that as that tech evolves, more perspectives are embedded in the work of that so that the system is actually equitable and fair.
Yeah, a great point. I mean, as technology evolves, we as humans have to evolve to know how to use it correctly, to get out of it what we can and to not view it as a problem or something to be scared of, but to just it's how we use it that's going to create the difference. So, okay, this has been a wonderful conversation and I really appreciate all of you contributing. I'm going to probably try to get you all to do this again with me sometime because I could probably write a dissertation on what I just learned from this conversation. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to speaking with you all again in the future.
Thanks, Kim.